Alrighty, and we're back. Hopefully y'all kept tuning in from part uno. I was chasing the cat. Out of breath. He wanted to play. Thanks for the break. Y'all are precious. Okay. Excuse me. Body's making noises. I have hiccups right now. And I'm out of breath. And it burped and... this is gonna be fun. I should have waited till I caught my breath before I started this again. But now instead, y'all get to be a part of this. Great. Hello, are you coming in? Like I said, the furball has been on a roll this morning. He laid back down on with the shoes. Okay. The wealth of society, argued Marx, comes from human labor and from nature. Oh, I feel like I read that one. Labor, he argued at the start of the critique of the Gotha program, is not the source of all wealth. Nature is just as much the source of use values, and it is surely of such that material wealth consists as labor, which itself is only the manifestation of a force of nature, human labor power. Emphasis in the original. Marx understood wealth to mean the things that we need to live, survive, and thrive, as distinct from value, which is a characteristic we assign to commodities and is socially constructed. As socialist, author Paul D'Amato argued, value is not a real thing, but a historically evolved relation between human beings that takes the fantastic form of a relation between things. Value is a meaningless category outside of market relations. We can see that labor is necessary to create the various use values that make up the wealth of society. But the labor imbued in goods made for sale, commodities, has an added role as a measure of exchange value. How does it fulfill the latter function? Some amount of labor is necessary to power... I have no idea what's going on with my hair. It feels weird. Whatever. In that sense, as we've said, it is the common denominator across all goods. The cost to society of making a given commodity, its value, can be measured by the amount of labor devoted in its production. An exchange value is a quantitative representation of that value. Roughly, if it takes 10 times as long to make a chair as it does a loaf of bread, that would make a chair about 10 times more valuable. To become an effective means of measurement, the labor imbued in commodities has to become generalized. I really hope you can hear him because he is on a roll. Been so talkative and laps. Tried taking him for a walk this morning, but it was raining, so the fur ball is... he's a crack kitty right now. To become an effective means of measurement, the labor imbued in commodities has to become generalized. Specific work, like baking or woodworking, has to be replaced with quantities of generic, or abstract, as Marx calls it, labor time. The real concrete labor that has gone into producing a commodity is too varied and complex to be used as a measurement for comparison. But all acts of labor can be boiled down, as Marxist economics David McNally put it, to expenditures of the general human capacity to exert muscles, energies, and brain cells to create or produce something. Even if all commodities come into being through different acts of concrete labor, they nonetheless all share the property of being products of the generic act of human labor, or what Marx calls abstract labor, i.e., labor as a general power abstracted from all its specific forms. Marx used his favorite example of a commodity, linen, to explain the point in Capital. Human labor creates value, but is not itself value. It becomes value in its coagulated state, in objective form. The value of the linen as a congealed mass of human labor can be expressed only as an objectivity, a thing which is materially different from the linen itself and yet common to the linen and all other commodities. Marx defined this labor time as human labor in the abstract. Abstract because the exchange value of a commodity is not determined by what kind of specific or concrete labor went into making something, only how much of it was required. Whereas use values are defined by the how and the what of labor. Exchange values are defined only by the how much. The market thus reduces specific kinds of labor. For example, assembling toaster ovens versus baking bread versus teaching a class into quantities of generalized abstract labor. Baking is the type of concrete labor that results in bread, but an hour's worth of abstract labor determines that the value of bread is commensurate with 1/10 of the value of a chair. And a toaster oven's price isn't determined by the fact that welding, electronics, mechanics, and assembly went into its production. It is measured only by the number of general or abstract hours of labor this adds up to. Simply put, you don't trade tailoring for mechanics at the store. You trade hour for hour. In Marx's poetic, if not entirely attractive imagery, first labor is abstracted away from its unique qualitative form, then it congeals back into discernible quantities. He wrote, "The use values, coat and linen, are combinations of, on the one hand, productive activity with a definite purpose, and on the other, cloth and yarn. The values, coat and linen, however, are merely congealed in quantities of homogeneous labor. In the same way, the labor contained in these values does not count by virtue of its productive relation to cloth and yarn, but only as being an expenditure of human labor power. Tailoring and weaving are the formative elements in the use values, coat and linen, precisely because these two kinds of labor are of different qualities, but only insofar as abstraction is made from their particular qualities, only insofar as both possess the same quality of being human labor, do tailoring and weaving form the substance of the values of the two articles mentioned. Measurements of abstract labor may be easiest to see in their physical manifestations. The exertion of human energy can clearly transform or combine raw materials into finished products, but the same process is at work if the end result of the efforts is not a physical but a social commodity. The product might not be palpably tangible. It might be care performed on a patient. It might be knowledge conveyed to a student. But these outcomes, too, are the product of human labor, and therefore the value of those outcomes is determined by the labor time necessary to generate them, just as it is for physical commodities. Service labor, just as other forms of labor, also becomes labor in the abstract. An hour's worth of tailoring produces a certain number of coats, just as an hour's worth of nursing equals some number of patients seen. And an hour's worth of a teacher's labor produces a certain number of graded tests, an hour's worth of truck driving to deliver goods covers a certain number of miles, and so on. Nor is the concept of value as determined by labor time disproved by the difference between relatively skilled and unskilled jobs. It is true that an hour of labor in a skilled industry does indeed contribute more value to a product than an hour of labor in an unskilled industry. The labor that goes into manufacturing a Boeing 737 jetliner produces more value than the labor that goes into making a hamburger. Debatable. This is because you are paying for several layers of labor time. One can quickly master what goes into making a hamburger, but the learning curve that goes into being a mechanist is steep. A machinist, I think it's a machinist, I'm not sure. Therefore, the value of a machinist's labor includes the physical hours worked as well as the labor time that helped reduce their skills in the first place. The teachers, textbook makers, trainers, blueprint drafters, etc., who also contributed their labor to the education and preparation of a Boeing worker. Importantly, this also creates an incentive within capitalism to innovate in order to de-skill labor, thereby making workers more replaceable and lowering the value of the specific labor in that industry. The point remains that all labor boils down to units of abstract labor, even if they are now multiplied. Finally, it's important to note that Marx's intent was not to determine specific market prices. Prices form the starting point of bourgeois economics, which incidentally is why mainstream economists confuse more than they explain. We will explore in future chapters some of the factors that contribute to the formation of prices. These appear at the surface of the system, but Marx was more interested in uncovering the underlying dynamics of capitalism, what drives value, how it is produced, and for whom. We will continue that on your next dose. God, I am dramatic. Know that I want you. You don't need to listen to me sing. That's not fair. Okay. Dope. Into the quick, fun world of creamy. In Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking by Samin Nosrat. Creamy. One of the great alchemical works, wonders of the kitchen, an emulsion happens when two liquids that normally don't like to mix together or dissolve give up and join together. In the kitchen, an emulsion is like a temporary peace treaty between fat and water. The result is tiny droplets of one liquid dispersed in another, resulting in a creamy mixture that's neither one nor the other. Butter, ice cream, mayonnaise, and even chocolate, if it's creamy and rich. Chances are it's an emulsion. Consider a vinaigrette, oil and vinegar. Pour the two liquids together and the oil, being less dense, will float above the vinegar. But whisk the two liquids together, breaking them up into billions of tiny droplets of water and oil, and the vinegar will disperse into the oil, creating a homogeneous liquid with a new, thicker consistency. This is an emulsion. Yet little more than momentary bewilderment will hold together this simple vinaigrette. Left alone for a few minutes, the oil and vinegar will begin to separate or break. Use this broken vinaigrette to dress lettuce, and the oil and vinegar will unevenly coat leaves, tasting too sour in one bite and too oily in the next. In comparison, a well-emulsified vinaigrette will offer balanced flavor in each bite. When an emulsion breaks, the fat and water molecules begin to coalesce back into their own troops. In order to make an emulsion more stable, use an emulsifier to coat the oil and allow it to exist contentedly among the vinegar droplets. An emulsifier is like a third link in the chain, a mediator attracting and uniting two formerly hostile parties. Mustard often plays the role of emulsifier in a vinaigrette, while in mayonnaise, the egg yolk itself has some emulsifying qualities. Using emulsions. Emulsions are efficient tools for enriching plain foods. A knob of butter swirled into a pan of pasta at the last moment, a spoonful of mayonnaise added into a dry, crumbly egg salad, a creamy vinaigrette drizzled over otherwise unadorned cucumbers and tomatoes for a simple summer salad. Some cooking requires you to make an emulsion. Other times you will be handed an existing emulsion and your only job will be to keep it from breaking. Becoming familiar with common kitchen emulsions so you can protect their delicate bonds of cooperation. Some familiar emulsions: mayonnaise and hollandaise, vinaigrettes, though some are very temporary, butter, cream, and milk, peanut butter and tahini, once you stir in the oil, chocolate, and the ephemeral crema on top of an espresso. Achieving creaminess. Mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is an oil and water emulsion made by slowly whisking tiny droplets of oil into an egg yolk, which itself is a natural emulsion of fat and water. Fortunately, the yolk offers us a little insurance, as it contains lecithin, an emulsifier with one end that likes fat and another that likes water. With vigorous whisking, lecithin we're going to find out the pronunciation of that really quick. Lecithin. pronunciation. Lecithin. Yeah, lecithin. I was right. Dope. Lecithin connects the minuscule amount of water innate to a yolk to the oil droplets and surrounds tiny air bubbles. The two distinct ingredients integrate into a rich, unified sauce. But mayonnaise, and this is true of all emulsions, is always looking for an excuse to break or separate into the hostile groups of oil and water once again. For a basic mayonnaise, measure out, or at least eyeball, the oil before you start. Choose your oil depending on how you intend to use the mayo. For spreading on a BLT or a Vietnamese banh mi sandwich, use a neutral oil such as grapeseed or canola. For aioli to serve alongside tuna confit in a nikkoi sauce, use olive oil. Each egg yolk will comfortably hold about 3/4 of a cup of oil in a stable emulsion. Since homemade mayonnaise is best when it's fresh, aim to make the smallest amount possible at a time, though any leftovers will keep in the fridge for a few days. Oil and water emulsions always work better when their ingredients are neither too hot nor too cold. If you're starting with an egg straight from the fridge, bring it up to room temperature before you start. If you're in a hurry, submerge the egg in a bowl of warm tap water for a few minutes. Gosh, I'm tired. Fuck, I'm sorry. In order to speed things up. Lightly dampen a kitchen towel and lay it into a small saucepan. Then set the mayonnaise making bowl in it. The wet towel will create enough friction to keep the bowl steady and prevent spillage. Place the yolks in the bowl and start whisking, adding in the oil 1 drop at a time using a ladle or a spoon. Once you've added half the total volume of oil and created a relatively stable base, start to add the rest of the oil in more swiftly. If the mayonnaise grows so thick it's hard to whisk, add a few drops of water or lemon juice to thin it out and prevent it from breaking. Once you've added all the oil, turn your attention to seasoning the mayonnaise to taste. Follow these rules and you'll see that mayonnaise is difficult, but not impossible, to ruin. During one of his cooking lessons with me, Michael Pollan asked me to explain the science at work in an emulsion. I didn't really know, so I responded, magic keeps it together. Even now that I understand the science, I still believe there's some magic at work. Know that I want you. Alright, we have had some good reads today. I appreciate it if you watch one video to the next. Y'all got the daily read. We are going to continue with our Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Chapter 14. The Heart of Gold fled on silently through the night of space. Now on conventional photon drive. Its crew of 4 were ill at ease, knowing that they had been brought together not of their own volition or by simple coincidence, but by some curious perversion of physics, as if relationships between people were susceptible to the same laws that govern the relationships between atoms and molecules. As the ship's artificial night closed in, they were each grateful to retire to separate cabins and try to rationalize their thoughts. Trillian couldn't sleep. She sat on a couch and stared at a small cage which contained her last and only links with Earth. 2 white mice that she had insisted Zaphod let her bring. She had expected never to see the planet again, but she was disturbed by her negative reaction to the news of the planet's destruction. It seemed remote and unreal, and she could find no thoughts to think about it. She watched the mice scurrying round the cage and running furiously in their little plastic treadwheels till they occupied her whole attention. Suddenly she shook herself and went back onto the bridge to watch over the tiny flashing lights and figures that charted the ship's progress through the void. She wished she knew what it was she was trying not to think about. Zaphod couldn't sleep. He also wished he knew what it was that he wouldn't let himself think about. For as long as he could remember, he'd suffered from a vague nagging feeling of being not all there. Most of the time he was able to put this thought aside and not worry about it, but it had been reawakened by the sudden, inexplicable arrival of Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent. Somehow it seemed to conform to a pattern that he couldn't see. Ford couldn't sleep. He was too excited about being back on the road again. 15 years of virtual imprisonment were over, just as he was finally beginning to give up hope. Knocking about with Zaphod for a bit promised to be a lot of fun, though there seemed to be something faintly odd about his semi-cousin that he couldn't put his finger on. The fact that he'd become president of the galaxy was frankly astonishing, as was the manner of his leaving the post. Was there a reason behind it? There would be no point in asking Zaphod. He never appeared to have a reason for anything he did at all. He had turned unfathomability into an art form. He attacked everything in life with a mixture of extraordinary genius and naive incompetence, and it was often difficult to tell which was which. Arthur slept. He was terribly tired. There was a tap at Zaphod's door. It slid open. Zaphod? Yeah? Trillian stood outlined in the oval of light. I think we just found what you came to look for. Hey, yeah? Ford gave up the attempt to sleep. In the corner of his cabin was a small computer screen and keyboard. He sat at it for a while and tried to compose a new entry for the guide on the subject of Vogons, but couldn't think of anything vitriolic enough. So he gave that up too, wrapped a robe around himself, and went for a walk to the bridge. As he entered, he was surprised to see two figures hunched excitedly over the instruments. See, the ship's about to move into orbit, Trillian was saying. There's a planet out there. It's at the exact coordinates you predicted. Zaphod heard a noise and looked up. Ford, he hissed. Hey, come here and take a look at this. Ford went and had a look at it. It was a series of figures flickering over a screen. You recognize those galactic coordinates in Zaphod? No, I'll give you a clue. Computer? Hi, gang, enthused the computer. This is getting real sociable, isn't it? Shut up, said Zaphod, and show up the screens. Light on the bridge sank. Pinpoints of light played across the consoles and reflected into 4 pairs of eyes that stared up at the external monitor screens. There was absolutely nothing on them. Recognize that, whispered Zaphod. Ford frowned. No, he said. What do you see? Nothing. Recognize it? What are you talking about? We're in the Horsehead Nebula. One whole vast dark cloud. And I was meant to recognize that from a blank screen. Inside a dark nebula is the only place in the galaxy you see a dark screen. Very good. Zaphod laughed. He was clearly very excited about something, almost childishly so. Hey, this is really terrific. This is just far too much. What's so great about being stuck in a dust cloud, said Ford. What would you reckon to find here? Urged Zaphod. Nothing. No stars, no planets, no. Computer, shouted Zaphod, rotate angle of vision through 180 degrees and don't talk about it. For a moment it seemed that nothing was happening. Then a brightness glowed at the edge of the huge screen. A red star the size of a small plate crept across it, followed quickly one by another one. A binary system. Then a vast crescent slid into the corner of the picture, a red glare shading away into deep black, the night side of the planet. I found it, cried Zaphod, thumping the console. I found it. Ford stared at it in astonishment. What is it? That, said Zaphod, is the most improbable planet that ever existed. Chapter 15. Excerpt from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, page 634,784, section 5A, entry Magrathea. Far back in the midst of ancient time, in the great and glorious days of the former galactic empire, life was wild, rich, and largely tax-free. Mighty starships plied their way between exotic suns, seeking adventure and reward among the farthest reaches of galactic space. In those days, spirits were brave, the stakes were high, men were real men, women were real women, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri were real small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri. And all dared to have unknown terror, and all dared to brave unknown terrors, to do mighty deeds, to boldly split infinitives that no man had split before. And thus was the empire forged. Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of because no one was really poor, at least no one worth speaking of. And for all the richest and most successful merchants, life inevitably became rather dull and niggly, and they all began to imagine that this was therefore the fault of the worlds they'd settled on. None of them was entirely satisfactory. Either the climate wasn't quite right in the later part of the afternoon, or the day was half an hour too long, or the sea was exactly the wrong shade of pink. And thus were created the conditions for a staggering new form of specialist industry, custom-made luxury planet building. The home of this industry was the planet Magrathea, where hyperspatial engineers sucked matter through white rubber planets with lots of earthquakes, all lovingly made to meet the exacting standards so that the galaxy's richest men naturally came to expect. But so successful was this venture that Magrathea itself soon became the richest planet of all time, and the rest of the galaxy was reduced to abject poverty. And so the system broke down, the empire collapsed, and a long sullen silence settled over 1 billion hungry worlds, disturbed only by the pen scratchings of scholars as they labored into the night over smug little treatises on the value of a planned political economy. Magrathea itself disappeared, and its memory soon passed into the obscurity of legend. In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it. And that is where we will stop today. We will end this wonderful, glorious journey together. With another poem by Janine Pommy-Vega. Ah, certainty of love in the hand. Written in Paris, spring, 65. Ah, certainty of love in the hand, a bright new corner, spasms of clarity. Day throat-winded walking I am, filled with unmotion, singing. A turned-around tree dances, sparrows in her hat, a canopy of canaries. Spring, and I not with you? One more by Allen Ginsberg. Why is God love, Jack? This is written in New York, 1963. Because I lay my head on pillows, because I weep in the tombed studio, because my heart sinks below my navel, because I have an old airy belly, filled with soft sighing and remembered breast sobs, or a hand's touch makes tender, because I get scared, because I raise my voice singing to my beloved self, because I do love thee, my darling, my other, my living bride, my friend, my old lord of soft tender eyes, because I am in the power of life and can do no more than submit to the feeling that I am the one lost, seeking still, seeking the thrill, delicious bliss in the heart, abdomen, loins, and thighs, not refusing this 38-year, 145-pound head, arms, and feet of meat, nor one single Whitmanic toenail contemn, nor hair prophetic banished to remorseless hell, because wrapped with machinery, I confess my ashamed desire. I appreciate the few of you, the some of you, the all of you who watch these and enjoy these and listen to these. I hope that the sharing of ideas, this holding of space for the sharing of ideas is as beneficial to you as it is to me. May we continue to work together to benefit for the whole of each other. I leave this daily dose with y'all. Till next time, catch you on the flip side.